Hello, one and all, and welcome to the autumn festivities on Innistrad. Whether you're getting a pumpkin to carve up a nice jack-o'-lantern, or get a pumpkin spice latte, or, does Innistrad have coffee? Maybe it's more sense that they maybe have pumpkin spice mead? Hmm. Nevertheless, we're going to do some festivities that's going to be a howling good time, and showing off my top 10 cards of Innistrad Midnight Hunt. Now, a few clarifications as well as the honorary mention before we get started. Clarification 1, this is subjective. This is just personally my top 10 favorite cards of the set. These may be good meta cards, they may not be good meta cards. We really don't know until they hit the meta and then just see how they impact and such, how they interact with cards within standard. It's also going to be a very big dynamic because we're going to have the rotation with the set, so some archetypes might be better, some archetypes might be worse. So while I like the cards that are on the list, I would say still to be very, very cautious of using your wild cards to craft these cards, with maybe the exception of number 1, but we'll get to that in a minute. Well, a few minutes, depending how long this video is. Nevertheless, be very cautious when crafting cards on the first day of an expansion. I would just say open the paths that you want to pull or play draft or limited, see the cards that you get, and then just play with those cards within your deck designs that you have currently. Just test them out, have fun. It's always fun, the new expansion, just to test out new cards and such, and then wait till the meta stabilizes. And then maybe start investing your wild cards into cards that you think you're going to have a lot of fun with while grinding the arena ladder. Also, as stated before, with the subjectivity, this is my opinion on the cards for standard MTG Arena. I will mention if I think a card would be good in Eternal formats and such, or even just good for Commander, I will make that distinction. But just keep in mind, this list is more keeping a standard eye on the cards that are on my top 10. But before we do that, let's actually get to the honorary mention, which in this case, it is Rotten Reunion. Okay, first things first, the art on this is amazing. Like, it is it's a nice spoof on the American Gothic piece. Anybody who either did art history or knows a little bit of art history sees this piece and they can just automatically get the reference, so that's amazing. But it's not even just the good art that makes me like this card. I do think this is actually one of the more niftier graveyard hate cards as well as token generators that we're going to get in the meta. Are there better token generation and graveyard hate that we are getting in this set? Absolutely. But I do feel like this just being 1 mana, automatically hate a card, and then generate a token automatically. Yes, I know it's a decayed zombie token, and I know decayed zombie tokens are not as good as zombie tokens. I know. But the way I kind of look at it with this is, think of it kind of like a roundabout way combat shock, I guess. Where in the sense that the 2 zombie is just going to attack, it's either going to chump block something, or it's going to, trade with something. And you're either going to do 2 damage to the opponent's face, or do 2 damage to a creature and hopefully trade with it and such. I think that's really what you have to weigh the look at decayed zombies in the set, is they're going to be kind of like combat-oriented shock. Granted, not the most control-oriented shock, and even in the set we do have actually an upgraded shock, but that's besides the point. However, there is some really nifty shenanigans you can actually do with this card. Thanks to Kaldheim, that is still going to be in Standard, there is the card Mystic Reflection. So I do love the fact that we have such a cheap token generator that we can just simply just be like, foretell Mystic Reflection, either copy our biggest thing or our opponent's biggest thing, and then essentially just be able to make the Decay Zombie into the copy using Mystic Reflection. Like, I love that could be a potential janky combo to do. Also, other uses for the zombie tokens that are decayed, you could also use them for sacrificial outlets, like maybe you need to do a quick village rites and graveyard hate. So you can just 2 mana, just 1 mana, do the graveyard hate with the Rotten Reunion, and then do like a village rite, sacrifice, and then draw some cards and such. So I think like there's going to be some plays around that. I think this is actually a really nice budget graveyard hate option. And Honestly, it's a little bit biased. I do actually like the art on this a lot, but I do think there is actually some nifty shenanigans you can actually do with this card. Now let's get started with the list, shall we?
Number 10.
Number 10 on the list will be the Reckless Storm Seeker, as well as the Storm Charge Slasher. Personally, I just really like the design of this card. Now, before we get started on analyzing this card, let me at least break down the Daybound Nightbound cycle for people. For those who are new to Innistrad, they do have the premise of these transforming werewolves, and the Daybound Nightbound mechanic is kind of like a updated errata to that specific mechanic. So, the basic premise is, what you have to do is essentially you have to play a card that essentially will initiate the day-night cycle, or at least make it day initially. And then the way you transform it specifically is the following. If it's day and then you don't play any spells on your turn, or your opponent doesn't do the same, like they don't play spells on their turn, then it changes to night. So then the cards would transform, those that have daybound will transform into a nightbound permanents. And keep in mind, if it is night, when you cast a card with Daybound and Nightbound, it is going to enter the battlefield as its Nightbound counterpart, so keep that in mind. Also, if it's night and you want to transform back to day, it is just as simple as just making sure you cast 2 spells during your turn. Once you do that, boop boop, it will go straight back to day, and then you can get yourself a nice morning breakfast at your local Denny's or something like that. Nevertheless, so let's actually talk about the card now that we got that distinction of the mechanic out of the way. Personally, I just really like this card for more like aggro-oriented / also mid-range deck designs. The fact that if it's daybound and it just comes in as a free charger, that's perfectly fine. That's a nice aggro creature and it allows us to make our other late game creatures get haste as well as the attack boost. That's great. Like being able to like make our 4-drop be able to attack in with haste. That is Splendarelli to the pepperoni on that one. And then, if we do get to the night, it becoming Storm Charge Slasher, then this card becomes a beast. Both literally and metaphorically. The fact that it gets the attack boost, as well as the haste, as well as the trample, same thing applies here. Like, maybe it's already night with what you did, so being able to get this and then attack in as a big, bulky, hasty trample creature, awesome sauce. And then also being able to make your other creatures have haste and trample. So if you cast like maybe even like a death touch creature, that's great to give it haste and trample. Like there's a lot of ways to actually brew around this card. And I do think this is going to be a mainstay free drop in a lot of the aggro oriented decks that we see in standard. It's that good of a card. So number 10 on the list, Reckless Storm Seeker and Storm Charge Slasher.
Number 9.
Next on the list is Tovolar's Huntmaster, as well as a transformed side, Tovolar's Pack Leader. Okay, let's just get this out of the way. Yes, this is a push green card. Yes, technically on the backside when it's transformed, it is technically a Grave Titan. Let's get that distinction out of the way. We could argue whether or not green's getting more push cards, yada yada yada. Not time for that discussion. Let's just talk about this card. And of course, this card is amazing. A 6 mana 10/10, that's really good. And the fact that 10/10 is split among a 6/6 and a 2/2s, very, very nice. They also are relevant to being wolves, so they're relevant to the tribal archetype that they're encouraging within the set. It's a very, very, very nice card. Also, the fact that you have the Mana Sink ability in Limited to be able to use any of your werewolves or wolves to fight another target creature, that's just complete gas. But it's great because both sides of this card is great. You don't mind playing it on Daybound and getting the 2/2s. And the night side, if you can get it to night and be able to attack in to generate more tokens, this just becomes a legit threat. Like, anybody who played against Grave Titan in Limited knows how obnoxious this card can be if you don't target with removal immediately. So, definitely 9 on the list. Tovolar's Huntmaster, as well as Tovolar's Pack Leader. Just a very nice card. Like, it's going to be a nice limited powerhouse, but it's also going to have some nice applications in standard, within, of course, the werewolf tribal decks, but even just in general mid-range decks that don't mind getting the additional tokens, whether or not they're going to use it for wolf tribal or more jankier applications. So keep an eye on this. This card is going to do some shenanigans.
Number 8.
Heads up, number 8 on the list will be actually a bit of a cheat, mostly because I feel like these two cards are going to be both in the same deck. You're going to see that a little bit on this list. It's mostly just because there's a lot of good cards in the set. But I gotta talk about, since we've been talking about werewolves, we gotta talk about Tovar, and we do gotta talk about the new Arlen Core Planeswalker card. These cards are just, overall, just really good value engines. Like, Tovar, being able to make it where any of your wolves or werewolves, or itself, be able, when it deals combat damage, draw a card. We all have seen how Toski does in the meta, and we know that Toski is a really good card. I mean, granted, this doesn't have Indestructible and can be countered, so there's a little bit of oof on that aspect of it. But, still, the fact that when any of our werewolves can deal combat damage, draw a card, we've seen how good that is in Standard. That is awesome sauce. Also, the fact that when it's flipped, it's just helps flip all of our other cards, make it night automatically. So if we have any other daybound, nightbound cards, that's perfect. As well as, if we were playing this in Commander, of course, this is probably the best werewolf commander we got in a while. Being able to transform all our other werewolf cards from previous Innistrad sets, now being able to transform them with this, great. And also, you can actually do some fun jank with this with Maskboard Nexus, where basically, if you play Maskboard Nexus and you have any other transform card that is in the meta, or maybe in previous metas and such, that are creature types, technically those creatures are going to be human werewolves, so you can actually take advantage and flip them. And there are some powerful cards like, I don't know, Fane in the Ice, stuff like that, where being able to make them into a human werewolf so they can transform into their more deadly flipped counterparts is nothing to sneeze at. As well, I also have to talk about on this list Arlen Core. Arlen is just a great planeswalker, both on the daybound and the nightbound side. The daybound side, being able to make it where your creature spells have flash and can't be countered, that should not be underrated. Just giving our creatures semi-flash, very, very good. Like, for example, let's say we have Arlen out, and then we do the plus, and then just essentially hold up mana to play a Tovar's Huntmaster at the end of the opponent's turn. That is silly. You can even do that in combat and such, and do some really good trades and such, so there's definitely going to be some shenanigans where you're going to flash in some creatures that are a little bit busted when they have flash, let's put it like that. And then if you need to, just being able to make the wolf tokens, perfectly fine. Very nifty, especially since you need wolves/werewolves to help trigger Tovar. You kind of see why I put both of these on the same spot in the list. Anyway, and then also just being able to make the wolf tokens, but then if it's nightbound, the nightbound side of it is also great. So just being able to cast this for 4 mana and then do the plus to generate mana, that's great. That can allow you to play this on like turn 4 if it's night, and then just use the 2 mana for like a removal or maybe cast another creature and such. That's very nice. Though granted, one caution I will say to that playstyle, be very cautious about that playstyle though, because that is also a way to accidentally trigger it back to day, or maybe you intentionally want to trigger it back to day. Because, yeah, you cast Arlen, and then you cast a creature spell and such, that's going to do the 2 spell requirement, and then change your Nightbound card into day. So, that's a little bit of a oof on that, but nevertheless, if you don't want to do that, and you still want to keep it a night, just having a 0 activated ability to make it into a indestructible trample and haste, that is just... So yeah, Arlen, great planeswalker, and Tovar, great werewolf commander. And if a werewolf's deck exists in Standard, I'm going to call it a hunch. These two are probably going to be in the same list. You could even do some shenanigans with Bard class with this, but yeah. I can't wait to brew around this if I get the cards, so... Number 8 on the list, these both have to be together because chances are they're going to be in the same list, if I'm being legit honest with you.
Number 7.
Number 7 on my top 10 cards. Okay, let's just get this out of the way. Teferi, who slows down time. Now, I know a lot of people who are kind of a little bit scared about having a new Teferi in Standard, mostly because we had Teferi Time Revel as well as Teferi Hero Dominaria in the meta, and those were very high power, maybe some could say toxic cards within the card game meta. It caused a lot of people to be very cautious when a new Teferi comes into the meta. However, I will say, along with also Teferi Master of Time, I think Teferi who slows down time is just a perfectly balanced card. Yes, you can play this in control, but if I'm being legit honest with you, I think this card's going to see its most impact in kind of like tempo, mid-range value decks. Because I feel like you want to, if you're doing that plus, you want to take full advantage of that plus. Being able to untap like a good artifact, good creature, and such, and land. To do that, you need to be in more of a mid-range value deck. You could technically play this in control. I could definitely see people trying this within a control list. But I feel like the catch-22 of that is you do have to incorporate your deck design to maybe not foretell as much as you would usually do. And as I stated before, foretell within Standard is probably one of the best tools for control decks. So I'll be very interested to see if this actually makes impact in the control deck. Like, I can see it, but I'm not 100% sure on that. And of course, the other activated abilities are very nice. The minus on this is very nice if you need card draw. That's just like your typical... If control decks are going to play this, it's probably most likely going to be due to the minus, because the card draw on this is actually pretty nice. As well as if you get to the ultimate, yes, if you get to the ultimate, that is not game-winning, but it can be very game-winning. Remember, I'm talking about Standard here, and the fact that you untap your lands during your opponent's turn, you're only just going to draw technically one extra card from what you would usually draw. Now, yes, if you can get to the ultimate in Commander, this becomes absurd. We have seen stuff like Seaborn Muse and such, and stuff like that. It can do some silly shenanigans and being able to draw the additional cards from each of your opponent's turn, as well as untap your stuff. That's very silly. I could definitely see this being a lot more scary in Commander, let's put it like that. But in Standard, I think it's going to be a fine card. I don't think it's going to be like a very... How would I phrase this? I don't think it's going to be an obnoxious card as people think it's going to be. I think it's going to be fine. I think it will do some fun shenanigans, and you could definitely do some fun tempo-based brews with the new Teferi, who slows down time. So, whether or not you're playing this in a more slower deck, or if you want to fasten it up, rely on this time mage to do the proper time manipulation.
Number 6.
Number 6 on the list will be a very nifty mana rock that I think has potential for both Standard as well as Commander play, which is the Celestis. A nice central story piece card of the set. It's actually really nice that they got this cool artifact design. Just being a free mana rock that taps for any mana, that's very nice, especially for multicolored deck designs. But also just the ability to get the semi-card draw whenever night changes the day or day changes the night. I think it's going to be a lot more relevant, especially with a lot of people probably going to try to toy with the day and night mechanic, whether or not they're doing Werewolf Tribal or other variety of deck designs and such. So being able to essentially get the card draw looting effect, that's very, very nice. And also just the ability to be able to change night to day or day to night, I think is going to be very, very relevant. Especially for decks that would benefit if it's either day or night, depending on what they have within their deck design. So the fact that we have a mana rock that essentially has this activated ability for Standard, that's awesome. That is legit gravy, especially with all the good day-bound, night-bound, or cards that synergize when it's day or night that we have within the set. Also, I think this also could just be a decent mana rock for Commander in general, because even if you don't take advantage of the day-bound or night-bound mechanic in general, a lot of play patterns within Commander decks are going to be people who will naturally trigger day or night. You're going to go against a control player who's going to not cast any spells and automatically becomes night. Boom, you draw a card. You're going to go against a spell slinger person that's going to automatically just cast a bunch of spells, go back to day, boom, draw a card. Like the incremental card draw that I think you get from the Celestis, presuming it doesn't get removed, I think is very, very valuable. Like, it's something not to keep is not to underestimate. And at worst, if you need a mana sink, just being able to automatically change the day or night yourself to get the card draw, very, very nice. You always like to see Commander cards that have really nifty mana sinks, and this is a very nifty mana sink, especially if you incorporate more day-bound, night-bound mechanics within your deck design. So, overall, I like the Celestis. It's just a mana rock with upside, but it has some really cool upside that I think will have some fun, janky shenanigans both in Standard as well as Commander.
Number 5.
Number 5 is a little bit of cheating because we're talking about a whole cycle here, but I do feel like it's necessary to just talk about all these cards within one spot, and that is the really powerful adversary cycle that is coming in Midnight Hunt. Personally, all these cards in this cycle are just great. Like, the fact is that they have the ETB mana ability, where if you can sink mana into it to get the creature to become more of a threat, that's awesome sauce. But even then, I think a lot of people are going to misplay these cards in the sense that they're going to get a little bit greedy with these, like they're going to wait till they can sink the mana into it and such, wait till they get Bloodthirsty Adversary for 5 mana and then get their kind of like Goblin Dark Dwellers essentially. I think the thing that you're going to have to, the play pattern you're going to have to do with these cards is kind of like similar to Volky and Tibble from Kaldheim. It's the sense that there are just going to be some times that you're going to play this on curve without the ETB ability, or without the mana to sink into the ETB ability. And that's perfectly fine for a majority of them. Like having a 2-3 with Death Touch, perfectly fine. A 2-2 with Haste, perfectly fine. A 2-1 with Flash, perfectly fine. The only one out of this block that I think you do probably want to get a teeny bit greedy with and hold off a little bit is probably the Interpret Adversary, I would say, the white one of the cycle, because you do kind of want to have that Anthem effect. But even then, if you need to, getting a 2-mana free one to block a aggressive creature, perfectly fine. So don't get greedy with these, but I do think these are cards that are great on curve, but also they are just great later down in the game, both in Standard as well as Commander. Like in Commander, maybe even potentially some other Eternal formats with some of these. Just the factor that these don't become dead draws later down the line because you have the mana sink on them, that is great. Like, well, of course, as we mentioned before, Bloodthirsty Adversary. Like, it's great to have a 2-drop that's a 2-2 haste, but once you get to, like, around turn 5, if you can get that Goblin Dark Dwellers with a little bit of haste and boost, perfectly great, as well as all the other cards. So these are definitely see standard play, I would say. They're definitely going to be seen play in decks. These are just very versatile early as well as late game, so it's going to do some shenanigans. So keep an eye on the Adversary cycle. There's going to be some fun you can do with these cards. I will say that without a sweat.
Number 4.
Next up, my number 4 on the list. Mostly it's due to art and flavor alone, but I do actually like this card's mechanics. Croaking Counterpart. First of all, that art is amazing. I love the flavor text. I love the callback to Crackling Counterpart. It's just a really good card. Even if the token copy you get is a 1/1, I know that doesn't sound amazing, but keep in mind, there's a lot of value-based creatures we have in the meta currently. There's stuff like, for example, Goldspan Dragon's probably the one that's on the top of the brain at the moment. Being able to just make a 1/1 copy of that and be able to attack it with a 1/1 frog dragon. Okay, the mental image of that is actually legit hilarious. But still, being able to attack in, generate your treasure token from the Goldspan Dragon triggered ability, that's great. We're also getting a lot of valuable creatures that are coming into the meta thanks to Midnight Hunt, as well as that's currently in Standard. So, like, there's stuff that's simple as just making a Luminarch Aspirant copy, which, hey, it comes in as a 1/1 already, so just getting another copy of that you can then make into a 2/2 or make out of your creatures into 2/2s. Like, there's a lot of plays you can actually do with Croaking Counterpart in the meta that I think a lot of people are underrating. Plus, it also has flashback, which is great, so you can get 2 copies with this, so that's awesome sauce. I really like Croaking Counterpart. I do think there's going to be some shenanigans that you can do with this card in Standard, and I think, sure, they're 1/1s, they're frogs, but I think it's going to leap into some fun decks, let's just say. Or I guess you could say it's riveting. Or maybe your deck is going to croak. I could keep going with these, you know.
Number 3.
My number 3 card on the list is going to be a bit of a cheat as well. It's technically 2 cards, but I feel like they're either A, they're going to be both in the same list, or B, these are just going to be cards that I will jank brew around, read it together, or apart, and that is Lord of the Forsaken, as well as Lair, I think is how you pronounce that. Not Lair, like Lier, I think it is. Disciple of the Drowned. Personally, let's just split these cards on evaluating them real quick. First of all, Lord of the Forsaken, that's a great callback to Lord of the Pits. I also just love the value of these. Mostly, for me, I have a weak spot for these type of creatures. I know they're not the most standard viable, technically speaking, But still, at its base, a sits mana sits with Flying Trample. That's a threat. That's a good late game threat. Whether or not it's going to be standard viable is left to be determined. But I do like this card mostly for its activated abilities as well. And the fact that we have these abilities on a sits Flying Trample is great. Like, the fact that you have access to the channel ability, that's very absurd. Being able to make our pretty much a flashback spells have discount, or even do some shenanigans with Leer, where other spells that would usually not have flashback now have flashback. There's just some silly shenanigans. Like, you can do some channel fireball-like shenanigans with this kind of like pair, taking that ability. And the sacrifice ability that Lord of the Forsaken has is also really great if you're in a reanimator, or maybe even in the mill deck, potentially. Just sacrificing maybe a decayed zombie or any of your cards that is going to get removed already, mill free cards from your opponent, or maybe mill yourself to get cards to reanimate. That is great. So I really like this, and I'm definitely, if I pull this, I'm definitely going to drink brew around it. And I do think the partner in crime with this card is going to be Leer, Disciple of the Drown, which honestly I think is the more spiky card of the bunch. This is a very powerful card. Now keep in mind, when it says that spells can't be countered, remember that's including your opponent's spells, so you gotta keep that in mind. That being said, though, this is a good enabler for combo decks, I would say. This, not having to worry about counter magic while going off of our combo, that's very good. It's still going to be prone to any targeted removal, so you got to keep that in mind. But with that in mind, though, there's some silly shenanigans that you can do just giving your spells have flashback, like both in Standard as well as Commander. Like in Commander, we have access to a ton, and I mean a ton of cheap ritual spells. You can do some Storm shenanigans with Leer if you want to. Like, you could probably put this in the 99 in the Storm list and just go to town once you have Leer on the battlefield. Like, there's some shenanigans you can do with this card. Plus, I think this is also just going to be a good sideboard card in kind of like control decks, because granted, you might not be able to counter as much, granted, thanks to Leer, but if you're like a sorcery speed control deck where you're mostly doing spot removal and stuff like that, you're personally not going to mind having this in the mirror match, especially if your mirror match is more of a counter control variant, because then, hey, your opponents can't counter your spells anymore. Awesome sauce! So, yeah, I think these both cards are definitely going to be tried in a list, but both of them have their own individual value that I like about them. They're definitely going to be my jinky brew around mythics of the set, so keep an eye on these. They're going to have some fun, like, graveyard shenanigans, I will say. There's definitely some graveyard shenanigans you can do with these cards, especially in, like, a specific reanimator list.
Number 2.
Number 2 on this list, and honestly, every time I read this card, I am still surprised how good this card is, and that is Wrenn 7. Wrenn 7 is probably the most powerful Planeswalker that got revealed for this set. And it got revealed early, so a lot of people are already able to still evaluate this card and just think on it. And even to this day, with the multiple weeks of analysis I have of this card, I am still surprised how good this card is. Like, having the card draw like ability on this to get lands into your hand, that's great. It also can be used as kind of like a semi-mill option to help for reanimator decks. Also, just ability to make a token that is based on essentially how many lands you play, so you can block against some of the more annoying flyers in the meta. That's great. And then also the ability that if you have multiple lands in your hand, being able to ramp with its minus, that's amazing as well, especially if you're playing this like in a landfall-centric deck design. Like, there's going to be some shenanigans where you have a couple lands in your hand, you minus it because you have a Scoot Swarm on the battlefield, you play multiple lands, get the multiple Scoot Swarm triggers, and just get a bunch of Scoot Swarms on the battlefield. Or even a Kazandu Mammoth. Like, there's some, like, I'm definitely going to see some people probably are going to try this in landfall matter-based deck designs without a sweat. But even in just general, it's just a good value-oriented Planeswalker. Good card draw, good way to mill cards to your graveyard if you're playing Reanimator, and just good for landfall. And of course, if you do get to the ultimate, that's a pretty powerful ultimate, being able to bring back all of your permanents that get removed from the game. I don't think it's going to be as relevant as people think it's going to be, at least in Standard, mostly because the graveyard hate in this set, as well as in Standard at the moment, is pretty good. That I think once people realize you get to the ultimate, they're just going to play the graveyard hate, so you get your less effective permanent from the into your hand, stuff like that, essentially. However, in Commander, I do think this is going to be a lot more relevant. This is probably one of the best Commander cards in the set. Like, granted, this is not saying about the Commander exclusive cards that are coming in the set, boosters or such. This is, like, from the set itself. This is probably the best Commander card, mostly because this is going to go into one specific deck archetype, and that's really any landfall Commander decks, or any deck that benefits from landfall or putting cards in a graveyard. I'm talking stuff like Madrafa, I'm talking stuff like Omnath, I'm even talking about stuff like... Oh, I'm legitimately having a brain fart. Edinite, can you remind me It's like the John Planeswalker that you
What one card?
Commander that mostly is played in land-based Commander decks.
What one card? It's what card?
The editor's going to help you out there, but essentially, there's just a lot of value that you're going to get from this from Commander, from all those activated abilities. So, yeah, Ren at 7, it might be its 7th iteration. Well, technically 7 tree that Ren's been in. The lore is complicated. Well, not that complicated, but you get what I mean. But it's my number 2 card on the list.
Number 1.
And my number 1 on the list, and I'm going to be honest, I'm going to cheat again. One more time. Sorry, that got stuck in my head when saying the script. But nevertheless, my number 1 card from Innistrad Midnight Hunt, to be completely honest, can be summarized by one word. Removal. Removal in this set is completely amazing. Like, there's a lot, and I mean a legit lot of good removal in this set for multiple colors. Like, we're getting some great reprints of removal. We're also getting some great new removal. There's a ton of removal in this set that I think will see standard play, and even will have chance within Eternal formats play. But if I had to feature one, technically we're going to feature free because I'm going to do kind of like an honorary mention budget option, as well what's going to be the number 1 removal, which I think a lot of people are going to see this one coming. But let's first talk about the honorary mention removal. I think a removal that people will have to keep an eye on, because I think it's a lot more better than people will say at the moment, is Olivia's Midnight Ambush, as well as Moonrager's Slash. So let's talk about these. First of all, Moonrager's Slash. Yes, this is technically a lightning bolt if it's night, aka many people have been making the pun lightning bolt, essentially. And as well as Olivia's Midnight Ambush, which I think I'm forgetting the name of the person. Like, there was somebody on Twitter who essentially gave this calling it tragic whip, which I will admit, well played. Well played on that one. Anyway, so why do I want to feature both of these removals? Mostly because I think these are really great budget removal options at Common. Like, I know a lot of people will look at these and being like, they'll think of worst case mentality of this. It's like, oh, it's a free mana lightning bolt. Oh, this is just a 2 mana, do -2/-2. Is that good? Yeah, I know it's not great, but here's the thing you gotta keep in mind. Let's talk about this whole day-bound, night-bound cycle thing again just a little bit. As I stated before, a way that you automatically can make it to night is you have to not play spells during your turn. However, that can be a little bit unintuitive with some deck archetypes, because there's some where you do want to play creatures, you do want to play stuff on the battlefield and such. However, do you know which archetype actually will not mind not playing spells on their turn, but will be perfectly grateful of playing spells on their opponent's turn? You guess it, draw go control decks. And I think these are probably some of the sneakiest budget option control spells that we got in the set, because simply put, you're not going to cast spells during your turn unless you're casting your finisher, so you do not mind automatically making it into night. And then at night, these spells become absurd. Olivia's Midnight Ambush pretty much reads, kill any werewolf in the set. And of course, Lightning Bolt. We all know how good Lightning Bolt is. And granted, I do love that it does technically have a failsafe here, where one of the more tempting things you want to do with Lightning Bolt is be like, Lightning Bolt, Lightning Bolt, Lightning Bolt. Classic, D&D shenanigans and such. But This one actually does have the failsafe that if you do go into the lightning bolt mentality, that it does automatically become day, which sounds like a weakness, but if you have a turn where you want to do that play, that's perfectly fine, because yet again, it will go to day on your turn, and you could just easily play your land, and then just do a mana sink into one of your permanents that you already probably have on the battlefield, and then be like, here you go, opponent, let's go back to night again, and have access to my good removal. So yeah, I think this is going to be sleeper removal of the set. Don't sleep on these, especially if you are on a budget. These are some really good removal if you're more of a control player. Like, I'm definitely considering, just to prove a point, to make like a budget Mardu pretty much night control list, because I do think these cards are that good. Or even like maybe a Rakdos variation of the list. And of course, the number one card technically, and the best removal of the set, say it all with me, everybody. Fateful Absence. 1 and a white for a instant. Destroy target creature or planeswalker its controller investigates. This is by far one of the best removal spells we had in Standard for white in a long time. Like a very, very, very long time. Just 2 mana, instant, be able to destroy a problematic creature, planeswalker, both early game and late game. That is nothing to sleep on. Like, if you need to tell me what would probably be a safe craft for this set, I'm probably going to say that you can probably use some of your rare wildcards to craft at least 2 or 3 of these, because they're just that good. Like, they're going to see play in multiple archetypes, they're going to see play in control, obviously, but they're also going to see play in aggro, because they don't mind, aggro decks are not going to mind the downside of you getting to inevitably draw a card, because they're going to want to just take out the most problematic threat on your battlefield so they can go swinging in the facey. Yeah, this has a lot of applications for multiple decks. I can even see this expanding out to multiple formats, maybe not ones that have access to the quote-unquote better removals, such as like the Path to Exile and Sword of Plowshares, of course, but still, for Standard and Historic, this is probably the best white removal we are able to play. So yeah, I'm definitely going to be putting this in my Mardu control list. I love that we got such a good removal in white. White really needed this for Standard. It's awesome sauce. Can't wait to play with it. It's going to be fun. So it's going to be fun to essentially give some opponents some clues and tell them to essentially... Oh boy, I think I already made this pun. I can't believe I just made this pun again. I made this pun technically with Lonus when I was talking about Modern Horizons. So yet again, here's the pun. Now it's time to give our opponents to get a clue. And those are my top 10 cards from Innistrad Midnight Hunt. Personally, I really like this set. I do think it's going to make a lot of impact within the current Standard meta. There's definitely going to be some fun, janky opportunities with this, both in Standard as well as Historic, and there's also plenty, too, of some fun Commander cards that's going to be fun to play with in the format. Nevertheless, if you think there's any cards that you think should be on the list, or any of your personal favorites, just write them down in the comments down below. If you like what you see, please like and subscribe, and maybe watch some other of my janky brewing applications within the Brewing Labs. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'll provide a link down below as well. I usually